Well, if Mark puts his thing up,
Yep.
I'll take back my glasses.
Yep.
All right.
Is it because there's errors in it or because
No,
we just can't see?
all right, I saw our clerk come in, so she'll be joining us shortly, I assume. Yeah.
She went that way.
Yeah, all right, she's getting her stuff. All right. We're after 9:30, so we'll call this meeting to order at 9:32.
Lance,
Present.
still not yet. Mitch.
Here.
Schroden. Stride.
Here.
Mark.
Present.
David.
Present.
And I'm present.
Any changes, additions to the agenda? There's no objection, we'll adopt the agenda and move on to public comment. Terry, anyone? Anyone?
I only lost one person.
Kathleen Brandt. Hi, folks, this is Kathleen Brandt. I just wanted to thank you for a fantastic job. This is the most professional, well-researched, data-driven meeting.
We think you were going to say professional, but you couldn't say that.
All right, I'll keep going. This is
Well, wait.
really the best meeting I have ever seen run in Scio Township.
Oh,
Hey, Kathleen, you heard the word professional, then you cut out. The internet
Okay.
dropped.
Let me start over.
Uh-huh.
I want to thank you folks for all your hard work. And truly, this is the most professional, well-run, data-driven, thoughtful, insightful meeting I have ever seen in Scio Township. It is everything I would have hoped for any meeting. I also want to say that I will do everything in my power to support your recommendations, whatever they may be. I have full confidence. And again, I'm going to do anything I can to make sure that it's fairly heard, represented, and supported, and that there's fairness for firefighters' salaries and benefits. That's reference to comments for last night. So thanks for everything you're doing. I'll be there when you do your public hearing. Thank you.
thank you, Kathleen.
Next is Pam Boyd. Pam, you can go ahead.
Hi, Pam Boyd, a Scio resident. Ditto everything Kathleen said. Thank you.
Next is Rob Hudson. Rob, you can go ahead.
Ditto everything Pam said and ditto everything Kathleen said. Well done, gang. This is
Oh, we lost him again. What's going on? Oh,
Oh, you're back now, Rob, I think.
start over, Rob. Well, you don't have to say the thank you.
ditto and ditto. That was enough. Well done.
Okay. Sorry about the internet. I don't know if it's on our end or your end, but we keep losing you.
Really?
Yeah, it's on our end.
It's our end?
Okay, got it.
Do we have any other attendees?
No.
Okay, attendees. All right, public approval of the minutes. Go ahead.
No.
If you guys remember something better than I do, absolutely. I had to go off of my notes from last time. Because unfortunately, because of the fact of how the minutes have to be posted to the agenda packet, I have to get them to Terry very quickly, especially
Yep.
since we meet every week. So I wasn't able to go back and transcribe them as I had in the last meeting. Go ahead, sorry.
No,
I think Terry's looking at me.
Oh, I just wanted, was the video not?
Rob didn't get a chance to post the video before I submitted these to
It
you.
should be posted on the website.
There's two videos. There's the
Oh.
official and there's the unofficial.
I don't think the official video was available either at that point, but I might be incorrect on that. I'll have to go back and look.
Okay, we'll check and we'll make sure it goes up.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question, Pam. Your comments. Brian has said that You asked Mark if he could be the township SAD manager. My recollection was that you said township finance manager. Not that it's, I mean, not that it's a
We
big
we
deal,
can
because Mark
correct it
said,
to whatever.
Mark
it's
said no
supposed to
anyway,
be.
but.
But I just kinda-
Answer doesn't change.
Pam, was it SAD manager or finance manager? Just for the technical correction. Pam still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I've been trying to get Jillian into the meeting. David, ask that question again.
Did you ask Mark to be our finance manager or our SAD manager?
Our SAD manager, but finance manager too.
Okay, well,
He
boy,
can do
okay.
both.
You got it right. Okay, never
I thought I
mind.
said minutes, but I can always do it.
Well, you cut out again, but as Mark said, the answer doesn't change. So, all right. Are there any other comments? Bob?
So move to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, any other comments? No, second? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Minutes approved. Any communication and or correspondence? Okay. All right, presentations by, the only presentation we have is by Chief. So floor is yours, Chief.
Thank you. So last week, members of the committee asked for a option called 1.5. I hope I've captured what the committee wanted here. And if I understood correctly, basically saying, hey, what if we staff our Zeeb station only with adequate resources to have 2 in 2 out on the engine, and then also staff a medical unit. If I captured that correctly, I think this is what this shows here. That put us at about 18 in emergency response service, 6 per shift, 6 on duty. This is getting to the point where we want to consider adding a 7th just to make sure that we're covering all our empty shifts, but it would 3 captains, 3 lieutenants, 12 firefighters. We do run into one problem with building capacity. We do have capacity in the building for 4 people per shift. When we rebuilt the station, we lived in temporary accommodations. However, our parking lot's been changed. We don't have room to put a trailer up if we're to do that, so it would likely involve expanding the building upwards. We could throw some dorm rooms and such above the main building. And then no changes here to the administrative staff and prevention staff. It'd give us the ability to staff an apparatus with 4 people and a rescue with 2.
So the building, $2 million is to put in more dormitories.
So I'll get to that part in a second. I just want to run down our deliverables and performance on there. And there's not a whole lot of change. We're able to handle 2 medical calls, can handle 1 MVA by ourselves now. That's a change. 1 mutual aid company needed for an extrication and 1 to 2 mutual aid companies for tractor trailer fire. And we've got enough resources to handle a vehicle fire. It does make some improvements in our performance metrics. 2 in, 2 out, we're going to meet 100% of the time. 6-minute response time, we're still at 40% because we're not moving station locations anywhere. It includes a training officer. Our ISO is not going to change much. We would have the capability of licensing a rescue for BLS transport and also ALS transport in the future.
Why future?
I'll get to that on the next one.
Okay.
Pull up that document. So the committee should all have this sheet in front of them.
Great.
In the back?
Yep,
Okay.
that's it right there.
No. Okay. No, for the people on
Yes.
this. Okay, all right.
Yep, and I've got it up here. So if we run down option 5, you'll see that ALS transport is yes with an asterisk. That is a longer term goal. The state and our medical control authority require us to have a mutual aid in place for EMS if we were to be an ALS transport agency. Currently, the resources in the county do not allow for that. We have 1 department that is BLS transport, and we would need mutual aid of an ALS level. And our current provider, if we're taking work away from them, won't do that. So we would have to have other departments licensed to the ALS level so that we could have a mutual aid agreement on EMS.
Does the city of Ann Arbor license
No.
BLS?
No, they're not transport licensed. The only one in the county is Chelsea. Does that capture what you'd asked for at our last meeting?
I'm gonna let you finish and have some questions.
Yeah, no, I'm all set.
Okay, questions.
Yes.
The 6-minute response time includes all the medical trips, correct?
Includes all
All
responses.
responses.
Yes.
The data you showed last night, if I remember, I'm just gonna do the arithmetic quickly, it was about 60% of the calls are medical calls.
That's our ballpark number from last year, yes.
Yeah. So, and again, if I think creatively, and I say, well, why don't I set up a unit? And it sounds like the southeast is where we're the longest time to get there, correct?
So I'd say every fringe, like if you draw a circle
Yeah.
around our station,
Yeah.
and I'm not able to describe that, but there's a bubble we can get to within that window, but everything on the outside is where we're lacking in
What-
response times.
What
But
I'm
the
getting-
the
what I'm
southeast
getting
has
at,
our
though, is,
biggest
um,
percentage of run stuff that we miss.
We're constrained because we're on Z for response times. What I'm getting at is, why can't we set up a remote medical unit closer to where the preponderance of these medical calls are? And then what percentage would that be for the 6-minute response time? My guess is it's gonna go up astronomically because most of your calls are medical calls.
60% are, yeah.
And then I ask is, can't they work 2 12 shifts or 3 8s? Why must they be 24 hours and sleep and all that? Why can't they just work like a normal skilled tradesman works?
So I did some research into that question as well. Any person that we hire as a full-time employee or a union contract has to be a firefighter. And they would become members of that bargaining unit. And that bargaining unit would then enforce the same rules.
Does that mean they can't work 2 12s?
Correct. We have a 24-hour work schedule defined in the contract.
But,
Is that pretty well?
but follow this thought, please. If we hire, we need then six guys,
Correct.
6 people. So you'd have 2 on, then they'd have 2 days off, et cetera. On the
Yes.
same
Yeah.
schedule they fire, okay.
Yeah.
But what if they were not in Zeeb Station? Could they be somewhere else in the township?
Sure.
We obviously have to.
I just question the wisdom of putting firefighters in a building and not giving a fire engine.
Could they get training? Well, and
We
here's
can
the,
only hire, yes, we can only hire firefighters.
and here's the disconnect, I think that some of us are having, is that if we're staffing a medical unit, they must be firefighters.
If we hire any full-time employee other than the assistant chief, myself, and our administrative assistant, they have to be firefighter 1 and 2.
But if they never, well, is it conceivable in your mind, all 3 of you guys, that I'm pointing to the firemen, firefighters, excuse me, that someone who is, even though they're trained as a firefighter, would only be utilized for medical?
I question the wisdom of that because on any fire call, we're already short. So why wouldn't I have my people work instead of stand there and watch?
Well, here's the thing, if there's a fire and 2 and 2 out, not enough, you need 3 and 3 out, whatever. So you call in the 2 medical folks. Then 20 minutes later, they get a medical call. They have to respond to that, correct?
No, we utilize mutual aid in that situation.
Even though, okay, I thought with our license, we had to have our medical people staffed 24/7.
We do, but they can be used for firefighting activities. If they're on a fire call, or it's just like if they're on another medical call, they're not leaving a medical call to go to another one. If they're dispatched to a call, they're gonna work through the resolution of that call.
Okay, so, but then following up on Bob's question about response time. Having them Z doesn't help our response time.
No. And quite honestly, if I've got 4 people there tomorrow, I'm handling the medical calls anyways. It's not an issue.
Because all your firefighters are trained for medical calls. And there's more medical calls than fire.
60-40, last year's data shows.
Chief, another question. I know you said no one in Washington County's license for, we wouldn't have the mutual aid partner. You know, since we share the control authority with Livingston County, is there anyone in Livingston County that's licensed?
Livingston County has a county-run department. It's a governmental agency there, one department for the entire county. Chelsea borders Stockbridge, and that's where they have their mutual aid agreement.
I'll just make one more comment. We talk about the environment and all that. Sending fire trucks out for every call, medical call, is a waste of resources.
It does, it is, yeah, more fuel, more wear and tear on the engine, yes, I agree.
When really what I need is an ambulance. So I'm just saying, I think we're not looking at the data, coming up with creative ways to solve the problem of the so-called 6 minutes and giving the people of Scio a greater benefit. It seems like there's a faction that's hell-bent on the second firehouse. And the data to me doesn't say that's what we need. What we need is more medical response in a different location. And that will increase the percentage on that 6 minute. And that's all I'm gonna say. I'm gonna be quiet the rest of the meeting because I'm outnumbered.
I would agree that would improve response time to 60% of our calls.
And what would that take the number up to from 40% to what?
I'd have to
Probably
evaluate that.
80%.
It's not math I could do on the fly.
A question, and first of all, I apologize, I've missed the last 2 meetings. So Chief, are there examples, maybe even in larger fire departments that have the kind of model that Bob's talking about, where say it goes from the call to 911 and dispatch, and then they either deploy from this, they either deploy this ambulance or this fire truck.
Yes.
Okay, and so how would that work here,
So we're doing that today.
right?
When I have 4 people staffed, we dispatch for a medical call. If it's a minor medical call, we'll send our rescue out. And if it's a major medical call or car accident, we'll send both the rescue and the engine.
So in the scenario where we had a remote medical unit, as Bob's suggesting, how would that work differently?
Well, if there's a medical in that area, that unit would go. If there was a fire in that area, everybody would go.
Okay,
So we're tackling 60% of the problem there.
right. Yeah, I mean, so because I hear what Bob's saying about, there being more, better response for that majority of the calls. And I'd also want to look at kind of what inefficiencies that creates when, it's both. I need to look more at the data, but I think that I think that there's also some inefficiency that it creates if it's, I can send this ambulance from this remote unit out if it's a medical call, if it's in this area. There seem to be more, kind of decision points there.
Yeah, that's not an insurmountable
Yeah.
task. However, I think your point was that we look at the inefficiencies that we overlook, and that's 40% of the calls, which are the fire calls, which are generally high intensity type call. More of our emergency style calls rather than some medicals we answer in a non-emergency fashion.
I didn't see your data last night. I took a mental health day last night. Didn't see your data.
So why weren't you at the board meeting?
Did your data break down the number of calls in the southeast quadrant?
Yeah. Yeah, let me find it. And fortunately, I still have that on the computer.
We had 1,500 calls, well, ballpark, 1,500 calls last year. And roughly 1,000 of them were medical.
60%. I could pull up our actual data. Here you are. Here's our
Okay,
roughly drawn zones of response and our number of calls to those zones.
We'd have to-
so that's only 1,000.
So this is as of today, it's end of October
Okay, so
this year,
The
2 more
chart-
months.
the chart last night was a better chart.
which you want to process?
Numbers by month.
Oh, yeah, I've got that right here on the
Yeah,
top.
right there.
Yep.
What draws out at you? What hits you in the eye when you look at
Well, first of all, I have to be able to see it.
Medical,
It's the EMS.
it? I'd say it's more than 60%.
So in this,
Depends on the month, yeah.
last month, 111 calls, 70 were categorized as EMS, 51 as fire calls.
I think we're 69%.
Was that posted on the website?
It's in the township's board packet.
Okay.
So that middle line is all medical.
Category, or the incident category 3 codes
Yeah.
are all medical.
And the good intent, that's the next biggest number, the good. because that's a-
Good intent could be, I'd have to get the breakdown for that, but it's anything from mistaken car fire, steam mistaken for smoke, gas investigations, odor investigations, things like that, burning complaints.
Okay. Would you, I don't know if this is proper, maybe it's not proper in your line of work, would that be called nuisance calls? False
really.
alarms?
Not really, no, we've got a special false alarm category.
Okay,
We had
okay.
6 false alarms last month.
So these are basically non-emergencies,
They're service calls.
service calls.
A wait
Service
incident.
calls. All right.
Yeah.
Where response, now,
Carbon monoxide alarm, a smoke alarm going off where it's a malfunction.
do those count towards your response time as well? I mean, when you're responding to that, you don't know that it's not an emergency.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, okay, all right.
You don't have that geographically broken out, or did you?
No, I don't have the capabilities to break out incident type.
do you have the data?
I've got, yeah, the
I
data
mean-
sets.
You didn't
Do
do
you
it.
have a data set that's pulling that in?
Yeah, so Assistant Chief Armstrong is working on community risk reduction, and we're starting to gain that capability to break out incident types into geographic representation. We don't have, it's a work in progress, we're starting.
Yeah.
So that
Oh,
could
no.
be something we have in the future.
So on Bob's scenario, where I think you're saying we have a remote station, I'll just call it a station, but it's just medical services. And out of that area or building or however we set it up, we would send out ambulances to appropriate calls. And depending on where we locate it, we can we could increase the number of incidents where we responded under 6 minutes. Okay. Taking that to the next step, and you're saying that they have to be trained firefighters. You have ongoing training that you try to perform at every shift for every firefighter.
Yep.
How would you perform that if they're not at the fire station? Could you do it?
Yeah.
How would you do that?
We'd either meet at a training location or we'd have a training person that would come down and work with them individually.
But not while they're stationed on Z roads, I mean, on.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah, there are instances where we leave the building to go to a site, as an example, a township over here, or, yeah,
But when we burned down that house on my property.
yeah. All our on-duty people were over at Baker. And in fact, that home, we put in hundreds of hours on that home.
Oh, yeah, you guys, started fires, stopped them, then you had to
Yeah.
leave because people kept calling 911 saying there was smoke.
Even before that, we
Yeah.
spent 2 months out there doing search and rescue training. We
Yeah, you
felt
guys drilled
smoke.
holes in the floor and
Yeah.
then put people downstairs, I don't know, all sorts of stuff.
But that's a special occasion.
Sure. Whenever we have a house like that, we'll use it.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we need a parking lot. We'll do scenarios in, say, an apartment complex.
But day to day, how could they perform fire rescue training if they're not at the station and being trained in the equipment use. If they're not where the equipment is.
That's a fair point, yeah.
So that's where I'm wondering is, can you do the training that you would need to do, that you want to do?
Presents challenges. And again, I'd come back to why would we build a building, house firefighters and not give them a fire engine?
Well, I'm with you. But I was trying to make this work and find out if you could make it work. If you can't,
We could, I wouldn't say that. They'd be out of the building to train. We might make them come up to Z Road Station to do the training.
then they wouldn't be where they were pre-positioned. to.
Correct. But that would be typical of any training. That's, well,
No, it wouldn't.
no, it wouldn't, you're right. We would do, a training officer would be able to go to each station individually to train with company.
Well, this brings up an interesting point. Thank you for taking us down this road. You only have one training officer in the budget.
Correct.
So if there are 2 fire stations,
Yes, yes.
is he or she going to have training on this new process 12/6 on Monday at Z and then on Tuesday at Wagner?
No, it'd be Monday morning at Zeeb, Monday afternoon at Wagner.
Okay, but that person will go
Yeah.
and,
That person would be mobile and be able to work with equipment, work with individual
But
companies.
you couldn't bring the equipment with you because it's stationed at Z, for instance.
because the station that they would go to is fully manned and equipped with all the equipment that they would need to be trained on. Okay. So the issue is that if we do a remote station, it would either have to be fully equipped, which really doesn't make it a remote station, or the people would have to come here to be trained.
That's the problem that I saw with the remote.
That's fair.
Situation.
Why can't you swap the 2 from Z and the 2 from the remote and they get their training at Z, but the other 2, we're all firemen.
To work a half a shift at one.
And they can
place.
work the shift at the other place. The key to me is that data sheet and what glares right out at you. It's all the medical runs. And then we talk about the intent runs too, which we didn't even get into that. You add those 2 together and that's not a big fire truck.
But I'm saying they can all be handled with a big fire truck.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's a waste of energy and a waste of money. And I don't need another firehouse to do those things. Let's rent another location and try it out for 6 months. We'll give you the firemen and see what happens, see what your response time comes to be, and see what it really costs us. But, you want to raise all these issues, obstacles, why we can't. Just look at the data. The data is saying you got all these medical runs, for gosh sake. And that's what we ought to be focusing on. How many fires you got? I mean, look at the
66
line 1.
last year.
There's hardly, I won't say hardly, but the percentage of actual fires is so low.
5%, yes.
And I'm gonna have 2 firehouses for 5%.
Actually, what he brings up has an interesting point, because there's 2 things to it. One, in theory, at least, we could hire staff, if we got funding approved, we can hire staff a lot quicker than we can build a building. Just from plain common sense. We also could, I guess, possibly, I know there's pros and cons and problems to it. Station the existing rescue in a different part of the township, especially on a trial basis, in theory, once again. And we could collect data and see how it would work. The best part about that is as long as we can find somewhere to station that would allow us a short-term lease. So we don't want to sign into something that's 3 or 5 years before we have data to support it. We could then obviously see the concerns that we've had, see how the data and performance plays out, and see what other obstacles or benefits we get out of it. And we also would have the benefit of, if it doesn't work out for whatever reason stated, you also have additional firefighting staff to meet 2 and 2 out at sea. So in a way, it actually kind of benefits you in the long run. In the short run, there might be problems and obstacles we have to overcome from how do we do training, how do we staff this location, how do we figure out a lot of these problems. But even if it doesn't work out after 6 months or a year, depending on what lease we can find and what situation might exist, we have the equipment, or most of the equipment at least, hopefully. We just need the staff, and we need the staff regardless.
Do we need another ambulance?
I don't think so.
If we're a remote position,
I mean, if we wanted a second one,
Anyway,
potentially, I
Possibly,
mean,
yeah.
well, if you have a
It's
separate
2 years for us to get
firehouse,
one.
you need
You
another
would
ambulance
need
anyway.
another
that's
ambulance
what I'm
anyway.
talking, that's why I brought it up.
Or if we obtain a second ambulance, this
Position.
trial doesn't work out, I'm sure we could find another municipality that's looking for an ambulance.
So in the long run, you're gonna need another ambulance anyway.
that solves 60% of the problem.
It does. I'm not saying it doesn't solve it. I agree. it doesn't
Station
solve
with an
everything.
engine solves 100% of the problem.
Absolutely.
Logistical issue, and Assistant Chief Armstrong can speak a little more to this, but I'll briefly touch on it. To get an ambulance will take us 2 years. He's an interim fire chief in Dexter, and they just ordered one. Ford had 1 day, was it 1 or 2 days? 1.5 days where they could order chassis, and it's a year to build, so we can't order a chassis for another year.
Is that the only company that built them?
No, but it's typical of all of them.
Can we get a used one temporarily?
No. Even HVA is starting to recycle all theirs. They're not, they're buying as many chassis as they can because they can't build them.
So if we move the emergency or rescue, whatever you call it, rescue? Not an ambulance.
Rescue.
Rescue. So if we move the rescue to somewhere else besides Z, that increases our time now to this side of the township. So we've solved the problem in the southeast,
60% of the problem in Southeast.
60, but have we now created a problem in the northwest?
Well, we'd still send our engine out on that medical call. So
So we haven't solved the issue of wear and tear and pollution on medical calls.
Right.
On certain medical calls.
Right.
Okay. It's 2 years to get a second. Would you envision in 5 years from now, would you envision in a fully staffed, fully equipped Wagner station, would we still only have one rescue?
we can put as many as we want down there, honestly. If
So I
we
mean,
need,
would you have one in Z and one in Wagner?
we don't have space for one in Zeep unless we build up.
Well, we have it now. Oh, but we're gonna get, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I would say, that's something that we hadn't discussed yet, but if we identified that there was a heavier need for medical, we wanted to build a Wagner station, put a fire engine there, and then put 2 rescues down there. Then we could probably handle all of our calls without EMS mutual aid, with certain limitations.
But you would still send the engine from Z to the northwest quadrant
Based on priority, yeah.
with the ambulance following from Wagner.
Based on priority. If it's a minor call, I don't know that we would need to do that, but on something more serious, yeah.
So I understand what Bob's talking about, but something doesn't feel right about dividing your forces like that. It just, I understand the fiscal issue, but we're not bottom line driven.
And quite honestly, a model like that really doesn't exist in the fire service that I'm aware of.
That's what I was wondering, is if there are some models, that kind of,
No, anywhere a fire department has a station, they have an engine.
What if,
At least that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's something somewhere, but sure.
sure, but even in, okay, got it.
what if we took it one step further and created a different department, and we didn't call it in the fire department? We called it, we set up our own emergency rescue service, like,
Scio Township could create an ambulance service.
exactly,
It could.
and we had a different union. We'd have to set it all up from scratch, but I'm just saying, what if we chopped it to the side and this is only rescue?
That's,
We'd have to have different supervision structure. I mean, you have to be totally separate or you couldn't do it.
right.
Couldn't be in this firehouse.
No, it would have to be separate,
Right.
but that's what we were already talking about, is having that.
Yeah, it could be a separate agency from the fire department. Absolutely. There would be no union issues there. And then,
Sounds complicated, but
yeah.
Oh,
This is Mitch. I like that idea. Actually, it sounds like a pretty good solution. especially if it could be cooperative with the fire department. Somehow there'd be good communications. It'd have to be very,
The dispatch would take care of it.
yeah, the dispatch could get out. And it would solve a lot of the issues that would have been raised.
Yeah, but it would hurt my.
But it's remarkable that nobody else has tried that throughout the country.
So a number of agencies have, and they've all reverted back. Detroit was probably the most long-standing one, but Detroit EMS has now been absorbed into Detroit Fire.
Well, basically what we're talking about is starting our own HVA.
Yeah.
I think what, New York's the only one left, probably still has a separate,
Maybe.
I'm not
I thought New
positive.
York was fire and rescue.
They have a EMS, last I knew, they had like an EMS department and a fire department, just because they're busy with both.
And they have EMS stations and fire stations.
I think the EMS people are in the fire stations. That's how it was, at least with Detroit too. The ambulances would be housed in the fire stations because it's one big department, but EMS division, fire division, and the EMS had like a EMS chief, EMS division chief, stuff like that.
Unions.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So two different management structures.
Yeah, but because
In Detroit, it's gone.
it's gone, yeah,
They've integrated them all. Any new firefighter starting in Detroit works on the EMS side first and then promotes to a fire engineer.
And just keep in mind, we have a dedicated ambulance service for the county that is struggling to staff their ambulance only positions. And fire is struggling too, but not quite as much as EMS is. So
Because of two.
by creating a separate, we would be competing for a shrinking pool of medical only staff.
Because we train people to do both EMS and fire. So there's two opportunities. Basically, they're learning two jobs rather than just one or the other. Well, in fact, if we hired them under our current union contract, they would have to do both.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's not that the union, look, if we grow, I mean, the union contract can be,
Yeah.
you know, if we're creating new positions.
2 years,
it
3
can
years?
be
3.
Negotiated.
We just signed it, so we have until 2024.
And no, not, I mean, you can, anytime you can open it back. up.
Sure, sure. This is not
Anytime.
insurmountable.
Yeah, no, anytime you be open back up.
The thought I have here is a couple of things. One, as far as having our own ambulance service, from a call standpoint, it's an interesting idea. I think it might be a good idea, especially if we have additional senior living and things that have a lot of medical calls. I think there's a few problems to what some of the rest of us have said regarding staffing. Number one, finding staff. Number two, paying for staff, because that has to come from somewhere. And then number three, equipment. Just as you said, you know, even if we said go tomorrow and we had money for it, it's gonna be probably two to 3 years before we can have equipment and everything up and running, especially if we have to build something. We have to move into somewhere, maybe a little bit faster. But the question is then, do we do it? Do we do it?
Question is what?
The question is, do we cooperate? Hopefully it would cooperate with the fire department, but how do we plan that into the fire service? I'm not sure that's a simple question to answer.
Yeah, I don't know if.
I'm not sure where an HVA plays in.
Yeah, I think we're just too small as a township to consider having an additional department. It just feels like more bureaucracy and harder to manage. I mean, I would really, recommend we keep it as is, one department. And, there's going to be opportunities with HVA, with whatever's gonna happen there, to keep partnering with them and helping them along, but I'm not inclined to start a new department or try to divvy it up anymore. I just don't think we're big enough.
I've been noticeably silent, generously listening. And I go back to the first day that we met. Chief, you laid out our mission and our goals and our values very well. And we had an option 1 through option 4, which we could pick and choose from, or we could just say, let's just adopt this concept of 1 through 4 as an evolutionary improvement, continuous improvement of the service, because this township is growing, it's exploding. And we got to prepare for the future. So I embrace the evolutionary succession of 1 through 4. But then when we got into the numbers of 1 through 4, it became apparent that today, getting us to 4 is really expensive, a big step, without a sufficient tax base to support it. So that the millage rate is low enough so that all of our residents and all of our businesses can afford it. So when Bob, or what Chief, when you put the data up there of what are your incidents of calls, where are they targeted for? What kind of, who are the customers on these calls? And it came quite apparent that, as Bob pointed out, 60%, 50 to 60% of our calls are EMS, health-related issues. And as this township evolves from an option 1 to an option 4, we're having a lot of generational aging. And we're in a silver tsunami now. Yeah, so these
Long lifespans here.
So the 60 could be 70 or 80. And, I went home and I started thinking about not just the observation that Bob made, but also the comments that you all made relative to option 1.5. And when last night, I wasn't on the Zoom last night because I was trying to put these numbers together. It came apparent to me that I think Bob's right on target. Is that maybe we don't just start with and stop with phase 1 or option 1 or level 1 or step 1, whatever it is, but we don't go fully to 2, because 2 is really expensive, about 3.25 or more mils to put a new brick and mortar in, put a new fleet in, or replicate the fleet, maybe enhance the fleet. But maybe we just take the piece out of 2, which is the EMS piece, pull it forward to 1, call it 1.5. And it gets us there as a step 1, phase 1, level 1, a place of beginning. We're going to fully staff not only existing Z, but also the EMS. We have for step 2 or 2.5 Z. When is that? I don't know. Wagner. I don't know when, but it could be 5 years or something less than 10 years from now, depending on, again, growth, continuous growth in this township. So looking at 1.5's, at least on paper, it's doable. I don't know if it's compatible with the union agreement, but nonetheless, taking Z, even though we just finished renovating Z, it would require adding a second floor, because in terms of buildable land, the footprint or the envelope with setbacks and all this, you're going to have to go up. You can't go out because you got wetlands and whatever else out back. That seems doable, even though we just finished renovating the firehouse. But it has all of the elements of what we need to get to 1.5. Get your is it the AL?
Advanced life support, yeah, we'd be years out from that.
All right, what's
We
the
could
one?
do BLS
Yeah,
transport.
it gets you that. It gets you full staffing. It doesn't get you the new engine. It doesn't get you the ladder truck. It doesn't get you the bricks and mortar on Wagner. But it seems that it's a more prudent use of taxpayer money of evolving from 1 to 4 with an intermediary step of 1.5. Now, let's see, separate fire versus EMS. It doesn't seem to be a prudent business decision.
It doesn't what?
Seem to be a prudent business decision. And what I mean by that is you're going to have a management structure, a replicated management structure, which is more salary and presumably a little bit more operating expense. And the management inefficiencies is that, well, you know, it seems that if you have a single command, that's more efficient and more streamlined. And I'm talking about on the operations side, not on the fiscal side. And and having a second location just for EMS, principally because of the existing agreement that we have, labor agreement, then you're sort of inching back towards option 2 with the cost of maintaining a second place, whether you build it with your own capital and own it or you rent it. So I don't know that I would wholeheartely support that concept.
Those were 2 concepts you talked about.
Right.
Splitting the department
Yeah.
and having a second building.
Right.
Those are 2 concepts.
Right.
You don't support either one?
Well, I don't think at this time.
Just-
First of all, I just don't support separating fire from EM. I just don't support that.
Absolutely.
It's just inefficiencies all
Right,
galore. So that's sort of the thoughts that I have and the direction that I'm leaning. And then at appropriate time, we can go over the numbers that I've concocted last night.
Well, the only issue I have want to point out is expanding the Z road. And I don't know where this 2 million, is this a number out of that?
I guess. I don't have the expertise to spread.
Well, it's got to be at least 1 million. I mean, it was 2 million to remodel.
3.5.
3.5 to remodel?
Correct.
Okay, well, so if we go up, we build a second floor, question is, will the building take a second floor?
No doubt.
But if we build a second floor, let's say it's $2 million, we're simply kicking the can down the road. Because eventually we're going to need a second building. There's no doubt about it. We need a second building. We have needed a second building for 5 years.
Yeah, all the
And-
studies have indicated that.
I'm sorry?
All the studies that I've provided have indicated that.
And putting the EMS unit here does nothing for our response time. And that's one of the second, the first one was 2 in, 2 out, and that's for the people's safety, the firefighter safety. The second was 6-minute response time, and that's for the resident safety. So putting the EMS here on Zeeb Road helps the firemen, or firefighters, excuse me, but doesn't help the residents. So I do not support putting the EMS unit here at Zeeb Road. We can rent a building halfway down Wagner if we can find a spot. But again, you've got that issue of training people and having equipment at 2 different spots. So, but all we're doing is pushing the problem further down the road, because eventually we're going to need a second station. Especially with our silver tsunami and with the expansion that's coming in the township. 1 station, not gonna do it. Anyway.
Can we get clarification on this 6-minute response time? I thought it was the property underwriters that were downgrading or increasing our rating, our fire rating, which affects homeowners' premiums, that the 6 minutes didn't apply to EMS. Could you, and then the second thing is that in the event that you invest more capital into the Z bricks and mortar, it's unlikely that in your long-range plan, because we got to look at, 10, 20, 30 years from now, is that, okay, now we've got, well, 3.6 and now another 2, so that's 5.6 invested in that building. Are we going to find another location somewhere else for station 3 or 4 and close that one down? To me, that seems to be a waste of capital. That would be a negative. I'm going vertical on this building. It's how does going vertical on Z affect the end goal 10, 20, 30 years ago? Are you just going to scrape the building clean and build 2 more somewhere else? So you got to have that in your decision. But I'd like to hear, is it 6 minutes for fire, or is it 6 minutes for fire and ambulance or EMS that the underwriters are giving us a bad score?
2 questions really. So 6-minute response times comes from NFPA, which is a consensus standard. Any response we make should be within 6 minutes. And there's a turnout time component built into that, and then an actual response time, drive time. So I round it to 6 minutes just because it's easier to say 5.5 minutes for this call or 6 minutes for this call. We just call it 6 minutes, make that our call. Second, ESCI, we spent $40,000 having them study this. And in the end, they suggested at some point in the future, with growth, 3 stations might be appropriate. So I would agree that this station at some point would go away. We push our stations a little farther towards the corners. That eliminates the 5 road mile distance from any fire station. We include all residents in that 5 road miles, which affects ISO score. So it's really 2 different issues. The one, response time comes from consensus standards, and pushing the stations a little more towards the corners comes from ISO rating.
So the response time relative to rating isn't relative to EMS. It's only to fire.
No, it's to every call. And response time doesn't affect rating, distance does.
Every
2 different
response
measures.
that fire
Road
makes,
miles and
no matter what type of call.
Yeah, the only thing that differentiates an ISO rating is more than 5 road miles from a station. It has nothing to do with time, it's miles.
This, you can get tangents off from every comment, but I just have to say this, then Huron Valley, which they're over by the airport, they must have a 40 or 50-minute response time. It doesn't reflect or affect our rating because of their distance of travel.
Well, they don't respond out of that building. That's an
Well,
administrative
they'll be in Myers, or they'll be.
Yeah, they're strategically placed wherever.
They're here.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, bricks and mortar at Z has got to be part of the long-term plan. If you're going to scrape it in 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, 30 years,
I think we got 15 to 20 left out of that building.
but there was that on our first meeting, the chief did put up that slide that showed 3 different fire stations, and Z was not one of them. There was one, further north, up towards the northwest quadrant.
Miller, Delhi-ish,
Yeah.
kind of West Jackson and Wagner.
Wagner,
South
yeah.
Wagner.
So, but that 20, well, what'd you say, 20 years?
20-ish, 15, 20 years,
20
I
years away,
guess.
so, but, a $2 million investment for 20 years, I don't know, is that good ROI? I don't know.
I'm gonna make one more observation. And this is gonna be controversial as hell.
All right, let's hear it,
We're ready.
let's hear it.
And
Let's burn with Dexter.
And
First with the two
city annexation, kidding. And that is, the fire service, and I include EMS in fire service, is one leg on a three-legged stool.
What are the other two?
So you've got fire one leg, you got EMS on a legger, but we have not talked about, if we're talking about long-range planning, effective long-range planning, that maybe defers charterhood, maybe it doesn't. But we have another huge expense that's in our general fund, unrestricted fund budget. And that's police, $1 million plus for the contract, and it's escalating at, I don't know how much per year.
About 1.6 a year.
And, should this discussion, and I'm a big boy, I can take the arrows, but should, at some point in time, maybe not now, but should we be talking about public safety in a police and fire millage?
Are you sure you weren't watching
That was proposed last night.
Was it really?
Yes, it was.
I did not watch last night. I was
Yep,
working on.
It was proposed last
And,
yesterday.
and I'm looking, okay, we're at nearly 1.5 billion in general fund
Sure.
expense and a contract of $1 million.
I think it's close to 2 billion in this contract.
Yeah.
So at any rate, we're talking about a whole mill. We're a 1 mil general levy township. So that eats up our 1 mil completely at some point in time, if it doesn't already. So I'm just gonna be quiet, but I just wanted to put that on
Yeah,
the table.
If I may just, and I don't know if you already covered this, but, certainly we have to deal with that cost. But I am adamant that we get a finance director, a qualified finance director in place before we start looking at that. Because what you're hitting on is one of the key pieces of contention where I would question aloud here if there isn't a move to combine fire and police in a millage next year in order to backfill some problems in the general fund. And I don't want the fire service to get tied up in that. I want our audit to get done, a finance director, and then we can look at that. Because I agree with you, but there's a proposal being pushed by the supervisor, interim administrator, and deputy supervisor, deputy treasurer to actually combine it all together. They were actually, Jim Murdy expressed a little frustration that this group was even talking about millage rates. And also some frustration from the strong desire by the supervisor to have the board. We did set a special meeting for January 17th for this group to meet with the board at 7 PM. I'll send that out for the purpose of hearing.
A board meeting?
A board and fire service committee, meeting.
Work
This is
session,
the working.
not a work session,
A work session,
This is a
yes,
work-
yeah, a work session,
at 7 PM,
yes.
NFW. You can't start a session like that at 7 o'clock at night. It's
Okay.
gonna go till midnight or more. We need 3 to 4 hours.
I know. We can revise it. It was listen, I made a valiant effort last night.
It was a contentious debate.
It was-
Quite
It was a
long.
good hour
So,
and a half.
you know,
So
7
much
PM
for
is
my
what I
mental
have.
health.
But anyways, 7 PM is a detail, David, and I think Bob's even concurring. Thank you. I tried. But yeah, so the thing is that,
You guys argue about such petty things.
I know.
I can't believe it.
I know, I'm sorry.
It's embarrassing to watch last night, okay? Sorry.
No, it's okay.
You didn't
So-
watch it, Dave didn't watch it. David, you would cringe. believe me.
So, and what I want to say though, Mark, is I want this group to be sure to get the time in front of the board to present whatever these recommendations are and talk about it. And then once we get a finance director in place, which will hopefully be in the next 2 months, then we can look at that. It's just a process suggestion. I agree with the issue.
And to that comment, just keep in mind, I mean, other municipalities have done this and combined it. It's a challenge when one service is contracted and the other one is run by the township, because if you have a set millage, the contracted service is gonna keep presenting you here's the bill, and you pay that, and then your service gets what's left. And so it
And it
can,
becomes a single fund.
I think that we could take care of that issue with the ballot language.
you just need to be intentional as you go into
No, I
that.
understand, but I'm surprised to hear, I wish I was on, but.
No, it was a long meeting.
Like to get the context of the debate.
Well, there could also be difficulty of getting it passed. I mean, with the way people look at police these days. I know a previous department I was on like a few years back, just where I live, a small rural department of Unadilla Township, they did police and fire village together. I assisted to go out door to door, and some of the negative things I heard about people not wanting to vote for it just because the police was attached to it. So there's that caveat too of there's people out there who don't like police departments. So.
To that point.
Till they need them.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, of course, right?
I apologize for bringing this subject up because it's probably not the right time to discuss this. So if I could recommend that we just stop this discussion.
I was gonna tell you about the meetings that we had in 2004 and 5 about public safety, but I won't bother.
Okay. I was in town. I lived in town, but I was traveling the world for my work. Didn't pay attention.
Okay, setting public safety aside. Where are we with our discussion regarding 1.5?
You have more to present?
Yeah, for whatever reason, I can't get on this Zoom thing.
Do you want me to look?
Probably a bad number.
Did you go with
there-
old?
grab
I
your
just went to the township.
Type the number in off the agenda.
Hold on,
Well,
Mark,
you can
I'll
pull up
send you
an
the
old
link.
agenda
I sent
and
a bunch of
use
other
that hyperlink.
I just went to the link at the township website.
Yeah, that link was not correct.
Where is that number coming from, Ryan, do you know?
It was on the agenda packet earlier.
One's posted.
But what area of the website is it?
Meeting.
Yeah, that's-
On the meeting agenda.
So I asked Christy to print this off, and she printed this off for me this morning, and it's right.
So
Yeah,
my,
all the numbers are correct.
okay, my question is there a hyperlink embedded?
There is not.
No.
Not on today's agenda.
It is
No, no,
today's
maybe-
agenda.
There wasn't last night either on the
Remember
Board of
we had-
Trustees meeting.
you had this
Okay.
back-
So it's not a bad hyperlink
I don't
this
know.
morning?
There's no hyperlink.
There's
Oh,
no
there's not. Okay.
hyperlink. The information
Okay.
on the actual website has been corrected now.
So this is the
Since I
same
loaded it.
discussion. You seem to be able to get
Incorrect
in.
earlier.
We can't.
All the information on our end looks correct too. I'm not sure what. But we'll look into it further.
Yeah, okay, good. Right.
Where we want to.
Yeah, where's
To
the
get
end
that.
point?
Say this is what we're going to do. And then here's the increments.
Yeah. Okay,
This will be
good.
the
Get
total.
in, Mark?
But everybody understands.
Oh,
what
it's-
we're talking about.
It's thinking, it's thinking.
You'll be able to do it.
And the meeting number is the one ending in 8570.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Mark, did you email your analysis out? I haven't checked my email.
Yeah, to everybody.
As a side note to those zooming in, the meeting ID is, if this is a repeating meeting, so the meeting ID is the same for each of our meetings. So if you can just duplicate it, if you put it in your calendar, and just use the same number each week. Not sure, we're only supposed to meet a couple more weeks, but if we're not on the board's agenda till January 17th, I guess we got some more time.
Well, that's a debate because the chief was saying our mandate for our report doesn't change, just when we're gonna get together to discuss the report. That's his position. So which is,
Well, okay, having it sit for 6 weeks at least.
Well, and David, if I may, I don't know if it needs to sit. I mean, I think that last night the chief was asked to have, you know, both a report and presentation sent to the board. So I think that whatever, you know, this committee decides on, I think that there's a lot of detail that can be worked on and shared with the board. For example, some ideas are just even you know, the overview of PA 33, how that process would work. You know, we could do some enabling ordinances to give the public more assurance, hold us accountable.
Okay. So you are of the position that our mandated report time hasn't changed, just when we're gonna get together to discuss it. In the meantime, it can be reviewed by the trustees.
Yes,
Could you?
yes.
Share. Yes. I thought that's what you were just saying.
I'm trying to.
All right. Getting access to the share piece. Ooh, this is slow. All right. All right, so last night, you know, based on the chief's mailings and data for 1.5, I went in and worked on the.
Can you go full screen?
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Fit width, is that fine?
What, that upper right corner, you got the two arrows pointing at angles. Down,
A little bit down.
right there.
So last night, I went in and plugged in all the chief's data for 1.5. And 1.5 is focused on Zeeb and Zeeb only. Fully staffed, as we had in 1, plus EMS as we had in 2. And we came to the middle as 1.5. It's going to require going vertical to make sure that staff has the proper accommodations. One thing, or there's several components that I had to make some assumptions and certainly footnote, and that is that in the bricks and mortar, the 2 million. I think it's doable for 2 million, but you never know until the RFP goes out to the contractors and the bids come back. Then you're gonna know within a fairly tight range of what this thing is gonna cost. And you're also going to know what code issues that we have to deal with.
Building code, not.
Building code issues. And one is because it's 2 stories, an elevator.
Or Lula.
An elevator.
You might be able to get away with a Lula, but I don't know.
So,
Limited use.
and then
limited
if there is
access.
an elevator, then you're gonna have an elevator maintenance agreement. You're gonna have additional cost of operations because of the new 2nd floor. You're gonna have heat, light, water, you know, all, and cleaning and so forth. So you're gonna have all of that stuff. While operational costs like a maintenance agreement for the elevator and other O&M type things, that's not in the capital budget, but certainly an elevator would. But, you know, maybe the fire department or the city building department can negotiate with itself to eliminate it. I don't know. But anyway, so I think the numbers are reasonable. And looking at the graph, the chart, because I think that the chart, I'm more of a picture kind of guy. It makes me help understand the numbers. So the very first line, the dark blue line, is revenue forecast at 2.5. And this is the revenue forecast. All right. And you say, well, if we have a fixed millage rate, why is revenue going up? That's because it is a fixed millage rate, but taxable value continues to rise. So at 2.6 million, you should be able to start out at about 4 million in operating revenue. And with the growth, using a 2% growth factor, you're going to get up to around 6.5 million in revenue. However, your operating costs are also going to go up. And the operating cost is the gray line down here on the bottom. And again, this is at a 2%. So you're going to start out at a little less than $1 million. And then you're going to grow to a little over $1 million, maybe $1.5 million in operating expenses. The red line is an indicator of, I'm sorry, the gray line, that's net operating income. Forget it. That's net operating income, the gray line. The red line above is the payroll, operating and maintenance. It's going to start out at around 4 million in at 2% inflationary rate, about $4.6 million in operating. And then the yellow line is your debt service, or orange it is, I guess. If we're going to invest $2 million in going vertical, we can either out of ARPA or fund reserve or whatever, wherever you might want to have some equity in there to buy down your note.
What is that payment?
It's
under $1 million, obviously.
Yeah.
Is that the 75,000 a year?
No.
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 It is, wait, can you just turn it on the grid?
Okay. I assumed here $1 million contribution from ARPA. And I took out, a general fund loan and any other unidentified. So the amount you're going to finance, giving that equity, is about 1.6 or nearly 1.7 million, or that would equate to a millage rate of about 0.103. Call it 1.11. 11 cents. And your debt service would be 168,000 a year.
So that's what that yellow line represents,
Yeah.
160,000 a year?
Yeah, it's straight and constant.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing that changes within the 168 is the amount attributable to interest, which is a declining number, and the amount attributable to principals is going upward.
Right.
The interest that you're going to have to add back in is 362. No, wait a minute. Capital proven interest is 362,000 over the life of the note, but you got to finance the paying of the interest, so you add that to the amount of the overall bond loan. So getting back to the chart. So again, the flat line at the bottom is 168,000 for the note. And the last thing is that the accumulated reserve. So it starts out in the red for about 3.25 years. And then as tax base grows, so will the amount of your reserve, and so will the amount of your net operating income. Your NOI is also going to accrue, and so presumably you're going to get between 5 to 6 million in reserve, accumulated reserve. But remember when we talked about, Township Board of Trustees each year has a governor of how much they can authorize the levy. Well, pick a point in time where you have whatever the amount of reserve you want to flatline at and maintain. I don't know what the township's policy is on reserves, but it could be somewhere between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 million. And that would be about year 6, year 7 in between. And then you could flatline it so that the Board of Trustees puts a cap on the annual levy, the fire service levy. And you'd have to, I don't know if you could put something like that in the ballot language, or you could have a handshake, a business handshake on it, or an understanding of some sort. But nonetheless, you have the mechanism, or the Board of Trustees has a mechanism to govern the amount that it levies, so that you maintain the reserve that you need and you keep NOI out of the red.
I was looking at whatever our report says, would have that language in it. And the trustees could treat that as like the master plan for the fire services. And the master plan says what our intent is. So then it's up to the board and all the commissions to abide by that. But it puts the guidance in place right there, and just treat it like we're trying to lay it out, and then it's up to them to implement it. But it puts it in front of them.
To add some context to the 2.6, it's somewhere between 2.5 and 2.6.
We're at 135 now. So this is a total of 2.6, not 2.6 more.
No, it's the 1.35 is in the 2.6.
Okay.
So it's a cumulative.
1.25.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a cumulative.
1.25.
Yeah. So
It's an increase.
you started out in 2016 or whatever it was at 0.9.
Right.
Then in 18 or 19, you added 0.45 to get to 3.5. All right. And so then in 2023, the ballot question is increasing from 1.35 to 2.6, or whatever the number is.
Right.
Whatever the number
I just
is.
want to make sure that included the 135. So go ahead.
All right, so timing, where I said about year 6.5, 7, the governor would have to kick in. There has to be a parallel discussion of what is the long-term plan for Zeeb and Wagner, or a second station wherever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is going to run for 10 years, 20, 30 something.
Or a third station.
And/or a third station. So, there's a lot of moving pieces in trying to achieve the goal. And so you need a lot of flexibility. But one thing you're not going to be flexible on is the number of years in the levy, other than you say 5 years from now, well, you know what, things have changed. We need to either ask for more or less.
Well, we don't have to ballot.
Based on a
Less.
long-term plan at that time, because a long-term plan is, it's a strategy, but it is continuously improving and refining each and every year based on the circumstances, not just of the economy, but of your business, because your business will change. I mean, hell, we could have, COVID on steroids and EMS, you're not even going to have enough EMS units out there. Yeah, that's an extreme example, but nonetheless, that's the mindset you have to have, because this is not fixed in stone in any stretch of the imagination. All right, so let me just go over some of the fine points. On the revenue side, again, same model.
You guys left, excuse me, I gotta run out to this meeting, I'll be back in.
Same model, tax base, same assumptions that we did with all the other, the 4 other previous Yeah, it's just the amount of revenue is less, all right? And then, of course, the revenue projection. Again, one thing that I want to point out here is that this has the operating expenses, but it's based on the assumption of the Wagner expenses and based on historical of Z. It doesn't have an elevator. It doesn't have additional electric and fight, you know, it doesn't have those refinement to make it Z vertical. So looking at the on this line here, the second to the last line, that is NOI after you deduct your debt service. So you can see the first 2 years, you're in the red. And then, of course, the first 2 years on reserve, you're in the red. So you have to think of, all right, how do we plug that red ink? You know, how do we make it black? Or how do we do something, but keeping in mind your ballot language is fixed at a ceiling, so you can't go above it to offset the red. So at the end, it's what about 5.9 in reserve? And again, you can start governing it in year 5, 6, 7 to maintain whatever the township's reserve policy is.
So Mark, before we go on.
Yep.
If the ballot language authorized a higher mill for the first 2 years, and then they immediately reduced it, could that plug the red? By drawing higher? at the
Well,
beginning?
yeah, you're saying, well, you know, if 2.6 doesn't generate enough, can we do 2.5? Or 2.65?
Yeah,
Could you do it? Sure you could.
and we put it in the language so that the taxpayer knows that after 2 years, we're going to reduce it to this, and we'll consider reductions in the future.
That would have to go in the.
Because my concern is if we're coming up with something that doesn't self-fund itself, obviously we don't want to self-fund it, so it's spitting off so much cash that it's a burden to the taxpayer. But if we're doing something where we're planning from the start to fail, it seems rather short-sighted.
Yeah, self-funding, that implies that the fire department is not an enterprise department, but it's certainly a restricted funding department. I don't have a problem with the general fund allocating or appropriating to a restricted fund, but I have a problem if you have a restricted fund and you're allocating back to the general fund, and I think Treasury would have the same problem.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I just also worry because I worry about both those things because there are so many demands on the general fund and we've been spending money out of it on a lot of
Oh,
things.
yeah,
so-
we just, you know, I promised I wouldn't say anything, but we have a perfect example earlier tonight where you got a police services contract that's over $1 million.
Yep.
And that's
It's a lot.
That's nearly $1 million. So there's a lot of tension on the general fund revenues. Because you've got other services you have to fund. But again, let's stay away from that debate because that's for a different time.
That's why we're suggesting we just incrementally ask for a little more.
Government down.
Before we go on, Mark, Brian, you just said you were concerned about a proposal that started out in the red. Is that what you said?
Well, as far as it having, in this case, we're referring to as NOI, or basically after we have revenue coming in, we don't have enough revenue to support what the expenses are. So if we're going to do something where we don't have enough revenue to cover those first 2 years, we either need to work to ensure we have funds that we can allocate from the general fund to cover that shortfall, or we should have something where we basically make sure we can cover that in some way. To your point earlier, Clerk Flintoff, you said something effective like an ordinance or a limiting ordinance. Can you speak to that? Because that's actually, you said something earlier, basically limit or something we can codify some way where we do what we say we're going to do. We don't just say, oh, well,
Yeah.
we said this, but we changed our mind.
Right. You know, we'd have to discuss this, but one thing I thought about is if we're, you know, going to ask the voters for a higher number under PA 33, that to give and to help build confidence and give assurance that the board and the fire department is only going to raise it to what it really needs to be. We do an enabling ordinance that gives certain, you know, data, public comment period, whatever it is that needs to happen for each one so that everybody has the info. Yes.
No, I was waving.
Oh.
Down the line by.
Okay. I'm like, yes, Mark. And so it's just kind of an implementation thing about how we would do it, because I do think that this will be new for voters to, you know, be able to rely on us in that way. Mark, your spreadsheets are awesome, and I appreciate all the work you've done on them. As we go forward, would it be easy enough for you to somehow just flag our fund balance minimum for fire, which is 9 months of operating? That's our fund balance policy for the fire department.
All right,
9 months of operating.
okay, all right.
That's the minimum,
Yep.
and we don't have a maximum.
Well, right, but we shouldn't have a bunch of extra money sitting around.
Well, here's the, well, he's building Mark's model builds a reserve that unless you restrict, that goes to $5 million, right?
Well, certainly, but that reserve is, you know, you've got your, you know, so we'd have.
So let me show you. I
Yeah,
think what you're referring to is, oh,
The-
all right, sure. Down here, it says total operating.
There we go.
Somewhere in here is total operating expenses. Right there? Okay, so yeah, just insert a line divided by 9 or.
Yeah, 3/4, yeah.
Or whatever the percent. 9 months out of 12 is what?
Yeah, that's-
Quarter, 75%.
That's our minimum.
Okay,
And as long as we have that, then anything above that can be for
Yeah.
capital or other.
yeah, that's easy.
Okay, thank you.
So, but the question I have is, another controversial thought. Do we need a fund balance? The reason I ask is, we're assuming $175,000 a year to pay off the building, right? What if we just continue that forever? And every time we need a fire truck, we just bond again for a fire truck? You know, I guess the question is, does it make sense to put aside $4 million so that we can write a check and not have a mortgage payment? if you
Oh,
will?
that's built in. There's, right, I wish you could see this.
So the
Equipment reserve,
so that's not in the,
Yeah,
no, this is expenditures and revenue.
just a minute. Oh, you know what? See this?
Apparatus.
It's built in there, but I'd have to go to the data, because these are all rolled up to total lines rather than showing you hundreds of lines of
right,
This isn't your spreadsheet,
of
this is.
ledger line items, but there is a, there's 127,000 for a year reserve or capital replacement number, 127,000 for vehicles, and it's like 50,000 for equipment.
so that's built in, that's separate and apart from that curving line that goes up.
Exactly.
What's that
Well,
curving line that goes up for?
That's the reserve, but the 127 and the 150,000 is in the reserve.
Oh, okay.
It's
all right,
in the reserve.
Okay, all right.
So, you know, this would have to be tweaked. It said, okay, whatever your life expectancy is for a rescue unit, say 200,000 or 300,000, whatever they cost, you know, on your capital budget, 5 or 10 years or 20 years, whatever life is, bank, that's where you see it again, and then it would deduct out of the reserve amount.
But I guess the question that we have to decide, and maybe it's a board policy or a fire department policy, I don't know. Do we need to write a check for a $1.5 million truck? Or can we put a 50% deposit down and bond the rest and just continue that $165,000 a year?
Well, the way this is built is that in the 270,000, that's say 1/10, so that in 10 years, you're gonna have 2.7 million. So in your reserve, you should have 2.7 million for replacement of one or more vehicles. The point is, but the problem is that we have to be cognizant of that 2.7 in the reserve, because remember at year 6 or 7 or 8, you govern the millage revenue, which then decreases the amount of the 2.7 that should be available in year 10.
Yep.
That's why this grows on an arc upward up to, what was it, 4 or 5 million or whatever the number was. That's so that you could write a check to buy 2.7 million worth of, without having to go to the voters to
So-
village.
So maybe we should split the equipment out of that curve so that when it's capped, it's not capping our vehicle purchase.
That goes to the discussion, you know, when Mr. Pettingale or Pattinson asked, he asked, you know, about the loan, and I said, well, one way you could do it is you could have an operating millage and a separate debt retirement for capital improvements. So you could, you know, 2 different millage rates for 2 different
No, I
things.
wasn't saying separate it out of the village. I was saying separate it out in your curve so that the trustees, when they cap it, know that they're not capping the equipment. You're only capping.
I have to noodle on that.
I just don't understand why, if we're not gonna be buying equipment every year. Lance?
Well, we are gonna be buying equipment every year.
No, I'm talking about big equipment. We're gonna be new
Large
uniform,
capital.
new boots, stuff like that, but I'm talking
No,
about the
the
big
years
stuff.
like 10 years, the SCBA's 10 years.
And the trucks,
Trucks
I
are
think
10
we
to
marched
15,
out
right?
about 12 and a half years.
Mhm.
They have a 15-year lifespan, but that way we're.
Okay.
3 years in reserve for.
I think we're
for
getting,
one, and-
I think I'm taking us down a rabbit hole, getting into the weeds of the actual, what a finance director would actually
Yeah,
tell us what
yeah.
we need to do. I'm gonna pull back. I think, so I'm gonna pull back. Where are we?
All right, so, you know, I ran, you know, option 1 last week was just fully staffing Z. That was option 1. And that was about 1.75, call it 1.8 million. And 3.25 for option 2, last week's option 2. And where we had this hybrid of 1.5, option 1.5, and it's at about 2.6. So it's kind of, I'm not saying it's in the middle, because it does not have all the capital that requirements that 2 have.
Right.
So, you know, 1.75 is not enough to fund 1.5. It's just not enough. In fact,
1.75 mils is not enough to fund option 1.5.
yeah, I just want to show you something.
Well put.
Well, we want to make sure everybody
Oh,
understands.
shoot,
these
I
numbers.
got to screen share. Okay. And just to, that didn't come up.
Still can't get over the fact that 1.5 does nothing for our response time. Or the road miles.
All right,
Well, that's because 1.5 as proposed is not what Bob was suggesting. 1.5 as charted is still one location and not a remote
it's-
location somewhere in the southeast. So it's not really answering your question. It's not addressing that totally, but it's saying what we need. But then we also need a second location. And we need all the issues that have to be resolved. And that's gonna cost some money, but we don't know how much.
Yeah, 1.5 is location concentric to what we have now.
Right.
It's response time. But do you spend a bunch of capital on 40% of your issue, or you spend a lot less capital with the staffing of whether you're at 1 or 2, the staffing is in 1.5, and you spend a whole heck of a lot less. And I think that's Bob's point is that what capital do we need, as well as payroll, to address 60% of the problem or our customer service
And
concerns?
improve the response time.
Yeah.
Because of the separate.
So, you know, I don't know how we,
Does this have a second EMS vehicle?
1.5, no, you can use the same EMS unit that you have now, which would eventually have to be, this is what, only 2 years old, Doug?
Not even that.
No, it's.
So
June
it's
or
eventually
January,
gonna
isn't
have
it?
to replace, but you don't add a second vehicle if you're having 4 dedicated or 6 dedicated EMS, or cross-trained, maybe put it that way.
6 dedicated staff.
Yeah, to the issue. So, you know, it takes care of the personnel issues, and it takes care of the BLS, and it takes care of the BLS. It doesn't get you everything you need, but it probably gets you 2/3 of the way.
But it doesn't get a response time down.
No, and that's why I asked the question, is the response time the 6 minutes, is it a desired fire to get a 3 rating? That was one of our goals. Or does it take both fire and ambulance or EMS to get to 3?
And your answer was it takes both.
Yeah.
No, it's 5 road miles to the call, to change the ISO, whether it's a fire or medical.
But the percentage that he shows at 39% is all responses.
Correct.
So the goal is to get that 39 up to a much higher number. It isn't just fire, it's everything.
Everything.
So, to answer your question, 1.5 takes care of the EMS component.
Creates a separate EMS unit
It
in the
doesn't-
same location.
It doesn't change anything on fire, because if you need another engine, or you need another tanker, if you need a ladder truck, it's not in there. That's 2.
And not to take us backwards, I just want to ask the question, in the 1.5 consideration, have we considered using the land we purchased at Wagner with kind of just some sort of temporary something
Sure.
for a
Like
for a
pole barn?
vehicle?
Like a pole barn?
Something, yeah. You know, I defer to people who know better, but something temporary, and that would give us kind of a, you know, some data and a way to try it out, but we would actually, you know, reduce the distance.
No is the answer
Okay.
to the question.
Okay,
1.5 is designed specifically to address the EMS, the 60% of our business.
yeah, and
That's all it is.
okay, gotcha. And this would,
But you would still, you would still maintain Wagner in your land bank, because we have an evolutionary, presumably a revolutionary growth plan, long-term plan, and Wagner is in that plan, as well as Station 3 land banking is also in 1.5.
right,
Because I think on first day or second day, or first meeting, second meeting, we said, you know, if we know we're gonna have a Station 3 sometime in the future, land bank it now, so that 2 things can be accomplished. One is that you've got sufficient inventory of land to land bank, and 2 is you're taking care of it, the capital outlay in today's dollars, not 5-10 years from now, when it could be 2 or 3 times more.
right. because we own the Wagner property now.
Flat out and clear.
And so, and when I look at 1.5, the other thing about the evolution, it looks to me that if we were to consider 1.5, that the next step would be 3 and not 2. Now tell me if I'm understanding, because the 1.5, we'd already have the BLS and ALS transport. And so it would be,
Not ALS.
oh, I'm sorry, the BLS
We have
transport.
BLS, but we have ALS if we have a mutual aid agreement with someone.
Okay, so could somebody talk me through, let's imagine we're at 1.5. What's the next step? What components of 2 or 3 would we get next? Because it looks to me that we would be
Right.
pretty much going to option 3 from 1.5. I mean, all of this is incremental, but option 2 doesn't really seem like a logical next step from 1.5. Yeah, just with the components that we would
I
have.
wish I would have brought with me,
I was pulling some of 2 into 1.5.
the EMS piece into 2.
Right, so 2 would be the next step. He said 2.5 would be, or
Oh,
3.
good. Gotcha, thank you.
So
There'd be
in
something else.
2, in 2, that's not in 1.5 is an engine, a ladder,
Another building.
another building and a tanker.
Mhm.
Those are the major CapEx that's in 2, that's not in 1.5. And then 3, if I recall right, and I wish I would have brought my input sheet because it breaks it all down. Check your email,
I will.
Jessica, because the Excel is in there and it shows.
Thank you, I'll study it,
Yeah,
yeah.
it shows the capital outlay. In which year?
There's an Excel, because I only got the PDFs.
Yeah, I should have attached the.
You're talking about last night, only
Yeah.
PDFs came through.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I must have been running out of my second martini by then. I forgot.
Move, man.
Good to know these are reliable.
Mental health indeed.
Oh, no, they're more reliable.
I'll be right back. Carry on.
So Lance, let me ask you this
Yeah.
question. Assistant Chief, if you guys have input, go for it. What other bonuses, pros and cons do you see to going to 1.5? Is there anything we haven't thought of? You guys can think of.
Not off the top of my head. Because it gets the 2 in, 2 out, it gets an ambulance staffed all the time. Obviously, the big picture is the response time. And if we build a temporary building over there, would fix it. Other than that, I don't see anything else that we potentially left out as a bonus or an addition.
Because I was thinking
Yeah, I
of,
see. If you see anything
I
else,
think
Doug?
to Clerk Flintoff's point, if we had some sort of, can't think of how to do it, I mean, because you obviously want something with restrooms and power and all that. You
Yeah.
can't just have a pole bar where you drive the ambulance in and out.
Sure.
I mean,
It would be a bad idea.
You
Just wanted to
could,
throw it out.
well, I mean, you could make a pole barn as long as there's
Yeah, you could.
shower, bathrooms for male,
Humans
female,
cannot,
ADA. I mean,
humans cannot occupy a building unless it has, that's building code. You've got to have all the proper facilities. I mean, that's just.
Absolutely.
Put a trailer.
Another-
Kitchen stuff,
Trailer.
yeah.
Because I was looking at the $2 million number, pending structural engineering, civil engineering, architectural, and God knows what other approvals. It is doable, but I can tell you from a little bit of experience, we were looking at adding a mezzanine to the building I'm building. Back a year and a half ago, the structural steel was $400,000, the limited use, limited access lift that some restaurants and other older buildings in Ann Arbor has was $60,000, and it's probably $100,000 now. There's a lot of, the elevator costs, if it ends up being an elevator, has a lot of cost. So it's one of those things where you're like, well, maybe we could spend less money on semi-permanent structure, but go ahead, sorry.
No, and I wanted, the other question I wanted to ask, and maybe you've talked about this, there's a big downside to this, but have we considered a scenario where if the sheriff had a different place to use as a substation, using that half for additional dorms? Because then we don't have the construction.
That is the square, the second floor would be roughly 1,800, 2,000 square feet.
Okay,
It's not over the whole firehouse, not over the garage. It's just over,
What, the north section?
right, the administrative area.
Yeah. The
So
non-sheriff
it's,
side.
so let's just say 2,000 square feet. I've got it in the input of what it is, the input data sheet of what it is. And the substation is, I believe, a little short of 2,000.
yeah, but
But-
it's close.
Again, the economic consequence is this, is that they pay us rent
Nope,
that's rent free. So
Yeah.
they're gonna go out and rent someplace or build or move to the county building next door. And we may pay their rent. They may pass it on.
potentially.
Yeah.
I know, certainly a question, I just wanted
Yeah.
to,
Well, isn't there agreement that the township has to give them a facility?
no,
No, it's not that?
that's why I took that off the
Okay.
consent agenda,
Well,
because we need to negotiate.
No,
But
it's-
currently, is that how it is?
Currently,
It's a valid
Sort
use.
Okay.
It's a valid use of township asset to use that space for your EMS. Then you just take the $2,000 off the table, other than maybe some interior
maybe.
renovation that you may need to make it a dorm or whatever the rooms you put in that area.
But that doesn't fix the problem of the 40% response time to the outlying areas.
Right.
right,
Which has been Bob's big thing was the data, and it's 40% of the time. How do we increase that from 40 to 80, 90, 100, whatever have you? Putting 6, 8, 10, 15, 100 people over there is not gonna do it.
yeah. I just, it's hard for me to, get excited about putting more money into that building, but I can be persuaded.
Particularly if you're gonna scrape it in 15 or 20 years.
Yeah,
You know.
I just have a comment here. We spent a lot of time talking about money. Kind of like a business decision. We're talking about, like we're in a boardroom, talking about bottom line, return on investment, what it's gonna take. Fire department's not a business. It's a service. Their service is protecting property and, more importantly, saving lives. And we have to look at it from the fire department standpoint about what we need to give them to do that job effectively. And if it means a second station, obviously we need proof of that. If it means a substation or something, but I think what Jessica just said, I think I agree with her. I think we're just kicking the can down the road, delaying having to take that big gulp and build that $3 or $4 or $5 million station or whatever it's gonna take. And we're gonna spend $2 million here, and in another 3 or 4 years, we're gonna have to build the station anyway. So, and I think you were just talking about the inflationary cost of building. I would not support 1.5. I'm sorry, I don't support 1.5. I support fully staffing Z. And actually, I don't even think we need 4. I think we need to get to 3, which means a not fully equipped, but nearly fully equipped Wagner, but in 10 years.
And you evaluate along the way.
And we evaluate along the way, yeah, I think we've turned our back on 2 of the goals that the chief has given us. 6-minute response time and the ISO ratings to save people some amount, we don't know how much. It might be a few dollars, it might be a few $100 on insurance costs. And we've totally turned our backs on those things because ISO is on road miles. So it doesn't matter how quickly you get there. ISO just looks at road miles, 5 road miles or less. The National an NFPA,
Yep.
it's a 6-minute response or somewhere in there. And putting the people in that building does nothing for those. So why are we wasting, I think if we spend all this time and do Z Road, I think we've wasted our time, we've wasted the township money, and we've not improved our service to our residents. All we've done is say, okay, now you guys work medical, but it still takes you 6.5 minutes to get down to Liberty, the tennis court, whatever.
Sports.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand the options. I'm not, persuaded by 1.5 yet, but I'm trying to understand it. And I think it's also, when we talk about the increment, it's also about just kind of strategy and how we implement. So do we say, we're gonna ask for option 3 over 10 years, and we're gonna put an enabling ordinance and a plan in place that it's gonna be this much here, this much here, this much here. I mean, ideally, that's what I would like to do. If we can get there, where we say, here's this over 10 years, and we really get a millage rate that we can live with for 10 years. That's gonna meet the needs, but then we're very disciplined and we're able to maintain that discipline so that we're able to have a plan that really gets us to where we need to go. It would be a change because, last time we didn't ask for enough, right? That was our mistake. And I don't want to make that mistake again. I also don't, it also provides so much more certainty to a fire chief and bringing in professional staff so that they know where they're going. I can't tell you how challenging it is for a fire chief to not know what he's got to work with, where he could go in the future, especially for any capital planning. So I think we're all in agreement about wanting to provide certainty and wanting to go to the voters, I would assume, once in a 10-year period, I would hope.
Oh, this is not second grade, just talk.
My mommy taught. Anyway. The committee is charged with a fiduciary responsibility of vetting all options and mix and match and do its best to present to not just the Board of Trustees, but to the voters and the taxpayers of Scio, the best plan. And I believe that option 1 through 4 include majority, if not all, the improvements that need to be made to get to or serve the goal of that Bob is, or Andy's charge for us. And I don't view exploring option 1.5 and doing our due diligence, not just on 1.5, but all the options. I don't view that as an inefficient use of time. I think we owe it to the taxpayers and the homeowners and the property owners to make sure that we've looked under every stone. And 1.5 is just another stone that we found. And there may, for next week or the week after, there may be 1 or 2 more stones, because we're going to take away this conversation today. And, I'm sure I'll think of something with my knowledge of the line items in this budget. And one thing that I haven't seen is the union agreement. So I don't know what the parameters are that we have to operate within. And that might help me free up some more thought. So because the key components here is you know, of course you need capital, but it's operating expense, capital expense, and within that operating expense, the biggest piece of our overall budget is payroll. And we have to make sure that we service that contractual liability, because it is a contractual liability. And there may be some other things that we can do to, you know, get us from 1 to 2, or maybe even 2.5. I don't know, or 1.75. So I view this exercise as looking under all the stones that come to us, and
So we can put the stones in front of the board. Let them start
and then we'll
choosing.
just put it there, and, you know, I don't have a vote in this, that's up to the Board of Trustees, but at least we've exposed them to all of the, you know, topics and options and whatever that we discussed.
Well, a couple comments on that. I'm not sure we should go to the board with multiple. I think we should go to the board with a plan. And if that plan is a multiple step process, that's fine, but I don't think we should go with a plan. Well, we can do 1.5, or we can do, we can go from option 1 to option 2. I think we need to say, this is what we propose is the solution to the problem. And let
Ideally in
them-
consensus.
I'm sorry?
Ideally in consensus.
No, ideally in
yeah.
consensus, yeah. But the other thing that 1.5, I think, does not give us, and correct me if I'm wrong, option 2 does, is a ladder truck. Option 2 gives us a ladder truck.
And a building.
And a building.
To house it.
To house it, because we can house it, it's big enough to be here.
No.
Oh, no, it's too tall.
No, he-
Usually.
sorry, I thought he
We-
said
I
the model we're looking at.
I think we
fits.
found one will fit,
Yeah.
like it'll be, you better shovel the snow off, kind of, it'll fit, but.
Okay.
It'll fit.
Ideally,
And Ann Arbor City actually had that issue, is if there was snow packed up downtown, their ladder truck wouldn't fit in, so they had to
the area.
air out the tires and make sure that the snow is always gone. I mean, it's
So,
close.
but here's the issue. If we go with option 1.5, then option 2 is 3.5 to 4.5 years down the road. Option, actually 1.5 is 2.5 years down the road. But so we're another 3.5 to 4.5 years before we get a ladder truck. And so that to me is an issue with the building that's going on. We have that, is that 4-story hotel still being talked about?
Yeah,
I'll let Bob.
well, it is.
It is.
It isn't off the table. It's coming to the trustees for a site plan approval.
Right.
And then it's gotta go.
Oh, yeah, I know, but I mean, they haven't, they still are, it's still in their dream
They
world.
have not.
Okay. But we have Lowe's, we have Menards, we have Meyer, I'm sorry, Holiday Inn, which would be a struggle if there was a fire in the middle of that building, that would be a struggle for this fire department. Is that true or not? Without a ladder truck?
We got supporting.
Oh, yeah, there is a supporting,
But it's
unless
even,
it's out of service.
but it's just even the 1-story buildings, right?
Just getting the roof of a 2-story building is a challenge. I mean, our typical ladder is 24 feet. So if a 2-story building is 20 feet or 25 feet eve height, even just getting up to there is a challenge.
Okay, maybe,
So we need a ladder.
and a ladder truck has the ability to, has a cherry picker so you can spray water down, or is that something different?
No, we would not get a truck that didn't have
Okay.
a nozzle on
Alright.
it.
So we're 4 to 5 years away from getting a ladder truck with the option 1.5. With option 2, in the original plan, well, it was 3 years. I don't, well, it's whenever we bump up the millage to start building the station, basically, right? And that's where we are. So I don't know, I just, you know, as you say, the township is growing. And option 1.5 does not grow the fire department,
And if I could add to that,
in my opinion.
1.5 also adds a second story that we are going to need once we get to the second building. So we're building in cost that we wouldn't need to if we just skip that step. If we think we're gonna have to go beyond that step, then that is.
Well, I think we know, I mean, I feel it from the ESRI study, from all of us, we know it's just it's when we have to go to that step and do we want to go back to voters before going to that step? But I mean, we know we need the second station. It's just a matter of when we're gonna build it.
And unfortunately, construction only keeps getting
I'm
worse.
sorry, Ryan?
Construction only keeps getting.
Construction
yes,
only
yes,
keeps
yep.
going up in cost as I've fortunately experienced. And the other thing, truthfully, in order to improve our service time, our ISO score, everything that we're trying to achieve here, we need that process to start now, basically. It's a process. I mean, you go through, you get the voters educated, you get the voters to vote in favor of it. You start collecting revenue, and then we have to go through the planning process for, even if I think it still technically has to go before the planning commission.
Yeah.
So, well, it would likely be an easier argument than some projects have, and that's a process. Architecture is a process. Ordering equipment's a process.
Mhm.
We
It's
need
I think it's a 2 to 3 year process to build that station.
You know, as a policy decision between option 2 and 3, when I look at the deliverables, I would have I would have no good basis to say why I would be promoting 10% of the time, meeting the 2 in and 2 out 10% of the time versus 100% of the time. I mean, that we need to have some basis for that. It's a little bit hard for me to look at our firefighters and justify building a second station where we can do 2 in and 2 out only about 10% of the time. I mean, that just may be as much as we can do, as much as we can afford. And it may just be as simple as that, but Chief, you just came back. The 10%, which I know is your best estimate,
Yes,
you
you're
know.
looking at option 2 there.
Yeah, so when I look at 2 to 3, 10% versus, 100%. I mean, practically speaking, wouldn't that mean that we would have the firefighters who, when they're working out of Wagner, they're less often able to, out of that station, they're less often able to go in to fight the fire, more often at risk, all these other things?
Yes. So we'd be staffed with a crew of 3 there. We wouldn't meet 2 and 2 out requirements.
Right.
But the guys would be on scene earlier. Clearly, if there's a rescue, they're going in anyways.
Yep.
But they'd be able to start working on setup, getting hose lines deployed and
Yeah.
ready. So as soon as the ZEEP station arrived, they would be able to go to work.
Okay,
And whereas coming straight out of ZEEP, there's still a setup process we go through.
and so this would be a little more complex of an analysis, but I'm just, it'd be nice to kind of know, like, since we have 2, firefighters from 2 stations responding, I mean, so really that 10% might be a little bit better, right, on the scene? I mean, because we'd have firefighters from, or is that not accurate?
Well, here,
Potentially, they could arrive, based on where the call is, they could be arriving one right after the other.
Yeah, we just don't know, there's so many
Yeah, it's
variables.
just a ton of
is
variables.
it safe to say in option 3, that 10% is 2 in, 2 out is only meant 10% of the time until the second truck arrives.
Repeat that, please.
The 2 in, 2 out, under option 3, you've got option 2, you've got 10%. Wagner Station can only commit to or guarantee 2 in, 2 out 10% of the time.
Just strictly statistics.
Yeah, until the ZEEP truck arrives.
Correct.
And if the ZEEP truck and if we're at 6-minute response, in this case, yes, the ZEEP truck would arrive within 6 minutes. No. The Wagner station arrives within 6 minutes.
Yep.
Then the ZEEP truck might be,
3, 4, 5 minutes behind, I don't know.
right, so that 2 in, 2 out is really is really, not really, not gonna say, I'm gonna use the word truthful, but I don't mean that. It's not really accurate because it takes you 3 or 4 minutes just to get off the truck and start rolling out your hoses.
We should have our hose line stretched within 90 seconds. We have a little more challenge because we got some really long driveways, so that involves dropping a supply line down or a driveway on occasion, things like that. I would say that does not prevent, even if they don't meet 2 in, 2 out, they can still apply water to the fire, just not from the inside.
So I mean.
So that does contain the fire until the second crew gets there, they can go in and fully extinguish.
So it's not as bad as it seems, I think is the issue.
That's fair.
And does the 2 in, 2 out, that's a separate issue from the response time.
Correct.
Right,
So when they get there, now we've either met it or we haven't, when the first truck gets there.
And that just means, can they go into the building right now?
2 in, 2 out does.
Correct. Doesn't mean they can't begin fighting a fire.
Correct. So we could meet
Quite
our
honest.
response time, even if we don't have the ability to go inside.
Yes.
And then when we get the second truck there from the Zebro station,
Then you go.
then we're fully capable of fighting the fire.
Yeah, so I would say there's several scenarios, and it's probably a pretty regular occurrence where our first engine shows up and there's a living room and a dining room on fire. And those guys pull up, they get their first line off, those guys are ready to work, so they start darkening down the fire from the front yard right outside the building. They get, I don't know, fire contained, so it's not continuing to spread. The next crews get there and then they can go in and finish extinguishment. That's not uncommon at all, I'd say.
It's not perfect, but it's doable.
Yeah, absolutely.
The difference here is if we have option 2, we don't have to wait for Ann Arbor or Chelsea or Dexter to come and help us.
Correct.
We're helping ourselves.
Correct.
okay.
So I will say something too that I think we've talked a lot about money, but I think we haven't talked about how much of an increase this would be for the citizens.
Yeah.
And when you gave your presentation 2 weeks ago, I think Mark, you said like the taxable $250,000, right? Is the average for Scio Township for home taxable value, right?
180. The average home is 180.
The taxable value,
I
right?
highlighted the wrong column.
Oh, okay.
You
okay.
were
Gotcha.
here that day. Okay, yeah.
So I was going off the 250, and these are the SAD rates from Chief's presentation 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And then this is an increase, monthly per month increase from the 1.35 to a 2.7, so it's obviously not the 2.48. The $250,000 taxable value home goes up $28.08 a month from the 1.35. To go to 3.5, it goes up to $44.75 a month, or a difference of $16.67 a month for a $250,000.
To go from 135 to
To go from 1.35 to 2.7 is $28.08 more a month. Yes, to the taxes.
Right.
To go from 1.35 to 3.5 is $44.75 a month
increase,
increase.
total increase.
Yep, and the difference between the 2.7 and the 3.5 is $16.67 a month for a $250,000 taxable value home.
So that overstates it a little because
Yeah, now it's from his figures 2 weeks ago, and obviously they've changed. Now it's 2.4 and 3.5, but I guess we haven't really, we've talked about how expensive things are, but really haven't broke it down to.
I compared this on today's dollar. Mark's analysis is much more in-depth and takes in a lot more factors.
And that was the numbers. I just took it off of this, this was 2 weeks ago's numbers.
Yeah, and those, okay.
I don't know if those are your guys's or.
Those were our
Mark's,
numbers.
But
Our
still,
numbers are similar, but they're a little higher.
A little more advanced,
A
a
little more
little high
advanced.
level.
and with that being said, I also don't live
This is
here.
a high school graduate.
I also
version.
don't live here. I don't pay taxes here, so I get fiscally responsible, stuff like that, not wanting to pay for something you don't need.
I don't know where we're getting that average price of the home. I think it's a whole lot.
The assessor, I took it from the assessor's office.
Taxable values, what they.
We're talking about
It's cut in half.
I
It's cut in half.
understand, but
Yeah,
I think it's worth it.
I think it is too.
Well,
A lot.
the taxable value in the Ann Arbor district, if you take the number of residential parcels and the taxable value, total taxable value in the Ann Arbor district, I think it's 189. And in the Dexter School District, the number of parcels happens to be 1,500. I remember that because that's an even number. I think it's 200 and some odd million for the, and that works out to be, I think, 180 not, anyway, the average of those two was 180, I think 189,000.
I do have the monthly
Some of our
breakdown for
houses are a
451
lot
too,
more.
so.
Some of our houses are a lot more,
Mhm.
but obviously we're talking average.
And I have the monthly breakdown right here of how much a $450,000 one would be, 400, 350. I have all that, so definitely willing to share if
I
needed.
think you gotta look at it as a doubling or tripling.
Yeah.
That is more pertinent than trying to say $16. So I don't buy that. I know what my house is, I know what my taxable bill is worth. And I'm sure yours is no different, and yours is no different. And yours is no different. You don't live here, right?
I have a problem, I don't live in Scio.
I did also at the spreadsheet look up every board of trustee members' taxable value and everyone that was on this committee, what their taxable value is, and I do have what it would increase up to 4.5.
You looked this up.
That's not, I don't think it needs to be shared here, via Zoom and stuff like that, so, but yeah.
It's all public information.
It is.
I can tell you, I just did preliminary math and I'm also not the assessor, so. Okay, so when my building is complete, if it's assessed at what I believe it will be, my annual cost, just the increased cost, if we were to go with at least option 3, would be $5,350 more per year in tax.
More.
Correct.
Yeah, but percentage wise, what is that versus? That's what I mean, you gotta look
Yeah,
at.
we can
is it
display it a
double or
couple different
triple?
ways.
Okay. And that's how people will look at it, is I'm paying $100, I'm gonna pay $300. Wow, what am I getting for that tripling?
Right, and how do we answer that?
Well, and again, it's not our job to sell it. We have to do an analysis and do what's right by the township.
Right,
And, I can see where we're going, but I'm sorry, David, I don't agree. Because for 5%, we're gonna put how many millions of dollars into our budget, Mark?
Oh, 4 or 5 million.
And this is where I can't get my head around that. I still say the data is telling us where to go. It's telling me I need a remote EMS site in the southeast corner. And I don't need a whole big brick building yet. Do something now, trailer pole barn in the meantime, while we're talking about building another firehouse and ordering a truck and all. You're talking 3 years anyway. So what do I do in the meantime? And then before 3 years, how do I help the people tomorrow, a year from now? Maybe I can buy a used fire truck. Maybe I can call Bill Ford up and say, hey, Bill, give me a hand. I don't know.
So we're gonna get you to do it then.
Hmm?
We'll get you to do it whenever we need it. You think you-
Well, Bill can only sell them a chassis.
Okay, so I did the math on a monthly basis too. So look at 1.35 mils versus 3.83 mils on an estimated taxable value of roughly $2.5 million. A monthly cost at 1.35, the current millage is $281.25. 3.83 mils would be $704.17 on that large of a taxable value,
Is that your estimate for your building, 5 million?
roughly. Yeah, and triple just based on the straight numbers. You're absolutely right.
And that's good by the village.
Yeah.
So
It's a function of what the village,
Just
the
need to look
village
at the
increases
village,
to.
and
It's
you
just,
know the answer
yeah, exactly.
to that question.
Yes, Mark.
All right, I want to bring this back to purpose.
Mhm.
So there are 4 purposes that we're to discuss, debate, come up with some kind of a position. Service improvement is preferred, is a preferred plan. If recommended, how long the service improvement plan meets the needs of the community. So that's looking out in your long-term plan. And what would be the estimated ongoing personnel costs? I think we kind of quantified that but for the the labor agreement. I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
It's on the Scio Township website. I think you go underneath community, fire department, employment opportunities.
Yeah, I'll send you right now, Mark.
So what I
could.
what I need to do is I need to refine the labor costs so that it reflects the agreement rather than me just saying 2 or 3% a year.
So if you look at the one spreadsheet I sent out, I've got a personnel cost estimator in there, I put their hourly rate in and my averages for
I saw
benefits
that.
and all that.
Yeah.
So that comes out of current experience.
Okay. It's on the website, so I can go pull it down. All right. And then the last thing is millage rate needed. So, we've talked about, what are the costs? What is it we need to get to the goal of 2 in and 2 out in 6 minutes? I think we beat that horse to death. We beat the numbers to death, other than refinements of refining the schedules to be more reflective of accuracy rather than just Mark's wild ass guess, And then we've got what, 2 weeks left?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean,
So where I'm going with this is that, but for the January work
Yeah.
session, is I think we need to start refining our discussion to a paper. Because I can see where it's gonna take at least 2 meetings to come up with a draft and debate the draft.
agreed.
Well,
And
just let me interrupt you for a minute, Mark. Did we all agree that we could meet on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving?
Next Wednesday. Yes.
Okay, good. Our next meeting is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, isn't it?
That's next week, yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, go ahead, Mark, I'm sorry.
so I just wanted to bring the discussion back to the mission and what we're trying to solve.
Our next.
And I think that it would be helpful for next week that each member of the committee just jot down in an email or memo or whatever and send it to the committee of what your thoughts on, where you're leaning option 1 through 4, inclusive of 1.8 or 1.5, or a variation of 1.75, whatever. And then we can use that to focus our discussion of drafting a recommendation paper and findings. If that, I think I'm not saying we're running out of time, but it's time to put everything on the table and let's refine the discussion.
Are you guys ready to write that recommendation on a piece of paper now and I can tabulate it here?
I'm not ready to write it right now. I need at least 2 martinis.
At least what, 2 more meetings?
2 more martinis.
Martinis.
Just you're creatively thinking.
Exactly.
What do you think I have in here?
Mimosa.
And I wanna be clear, where do we have noted, or do we, how long a service improvement plan would meet the needs of the community? I mean, that's a little subjective.
Yeah,
That we were relying on the chief to tell us.
Yeah,
I was relying on Bob. You're gonna tell me.
Jessica, based on my involvement in the numbers, it's based on the amortization rate of the equipment. It goes out 10 years because that's usually what you do the millage rate, or historically the township has done a millage rate for. But also the life of the equipment. Those are the 2 things that come to mind, and I don't think that's right. I think what's right is when you're developing a long-range plan, you're developing you're putting in place capital improvements, you're estimating them based not just on life of asset, but on growth anticipated. And let's talk about internal and organic growth of the township. Internal growth is just, naturally, the growth in taxable value on inflation. And then organic growth is new building permits. New building permits. And I don't know if the fire department, if they base their growth on building permits or a population, or what is it you base your growth on, and maybe we can focus on whichever is the appropriate thing.
To answer, one way of thinking about that is, we're already anticipating higher densities in certain areas of the township.
Right.
On, the Jackson Road corridor, along Baker Road, along Wagner Road. We've already got higher growth on Liberty and up in the northeast. So those areas are already growing out. But we're planning, the planning commission, the trustees have approved a plan that includes higher densities in the Jackson Road corridor.
Right.
And what does that mean? We are anticipating it and we're wanting to focus it there, but we don't know how much is going to be there in 10 years. So it's a guess.
There was something in the master plan, and after Jillian left her public comments last time on Zoom, because she had to leave before we got to the last public comment, I reached out to Doug Lawant. He got back to me initially, but didn't give me a full answer yet. As far as population growth, it is somewhat talked about in the master plan, but it's extremely long range, like 2045. So it's a little bit further than probably we could analyze or predict at this point. But if you even just sort of look at that and say, I think it was 30-something%, and you sort of think about that now, obviously Woodview's got 400 or 500 housing units. They're building an apartment complex as part of that has, I don't know how many units.
550 units.
550 total, okay. We got, Heritage Woods, which seemingly is probably gonna get close to breaking ground maybe next year. I kind of looked at that, I looked at the taxable value, and once again, I'm not an assessor, I just sort of guessed based off of some ideas I've seen in comparable property. This is gonna bring in probably several thousand people over the next 3 to 5 years.
Don't forget Scio, and don't forget Scio View.
Correct, Scio View as well. And there's now also the other senior living thing up at Parkland Plaza, which they might start construction, maybe, who knows?
I did hear from, I actually asked Joe Maynard that question. I sequestered him after a board. Said, hey, is that thing ever going in? And he goes, they're pricing it now. If this deal falls through, he's got someone else who wants to build it. So I would expect that one will go.
Is that another 150 units or how many?
I don't remember. It's a smaller
Under 100.
three-story,
4-story, wasn't it?
3 or 4, I can't remember.
I think it's 3-story with, does it underground.
Underground parking garage, yeah.
Even still, it's another,
Yeah.
and so what I said, the planning commission the other day in my comments was, we need to look at anything that's using above a standard deviation of our services, be it fire services, water services, whatever those are. If we have somebody that's causing a draw on our public services, they should contribute towards that, but.
Only if it's a PUD can we ask for
Correct.
that. If it's a by right.
Correct.
no-
That's coming in from a business guy, I don't want to be asked for all sorts of things, but I'm also realistic as to if my business was calling the fire department 400 times a year, I probably should be paying something for it.
Yes, but
So, Mark, you're suggesting that we all
Fair
put
thoughts
our thoughts
on,
on a piece of paper, send it to everybody regarding the direction, the options, how far out we should plan.
compile it, right?
Yeah, I'll put it together. Happy to.
All right.
We'll all share our ideas and we can comment on them.
Would it be inappropriate to do it as a group email since it's a committee?
Well, we're not, would that be considered,
No, I think it's fine as long as we don't start a big discussion on email, and we'll share it all out at the next meeting.
yeah, it's basically it's a one-way thing.
You're sending it to me?
Well, we can,
But to the whole group.
but
Yeah.
copying
So
everyone.
if you send it to the group email, then everybody can see it, you just should respond to each other about what you're saying.
Don't respond. It's basically all going, for instance, for the sake of argument, it all goes to the chief. Whether you agree with it or not, it all goes to the chief.
You could obviously respond to it at the meeting, that's no problem.
Yeah, if you guys all send me those emails, I will compile everybody's thoughts and data and have something for you next week.
Awesome.
Is that fair?
We'll try to be polite about when we send it to you too. The night before.
No worries, I know there's some night owls here.
sleep is for wimps.
I'm the opposite.
So is lunch.
I'm a morning guy. I'd rather get up at 5 every morning.
I do. All right, what, do we have anything else to talk about,
Oh,
on, presentations, recommendations? We're still on item 7. We have, Chief, are you done with your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Do we have any old business? I don't see anything on our agenda. I don't see any new business on our agenda other than our emails to everyone. That brings us to public comment.
Pam Boyd, Pam, you can go ahead.
Hi, Pam Boyd. I stepped away to speak to a firefighter friend of the family. But my first thought, being option agnostic and thinking in terms of marketing what you want to present to residents. Be careful of voter information fatigue. If you want to do something more, so if you go with option 1.5, well, we've already done upgrades to the Zebra Road station. And to come back and do more to the Zebra Road station, but then we need another station. You will start getting residents' eyes glassy. So go with your best option for the best goals hit with this next proposal to residents. It is my recommendation. And as you were all talking, that was kind of my knee-jerk reaction personally. And then stepping away to speak to the firefighter who does not work in Washtenaw County and could not work in Washtenaw County because it doesn't offer, a lot of places in Washtenaw County don't offer him what other counties will offer him. So Mark, I'm really glad you brought up the firefighters contract, because I think we need to have a good understanding of where our firefighters are in relation to other counties in order to understand what kind of a, in anything that we choose, are we going to be able to staff it quickly? Because there's competition from other stations and a lack of people going into this business. So I really do think that looking at, do our firefighters need to get a raise before we can get people to staff a second station or even the 1.5 station? That's probably all I want to say, other than Lance, thank you so much for your breakout of the costs. I appreciate that. Because I like to look at the smallest number, because sometimes that's all I can handle in the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Next is Rob. Rob, you can go ahead.
Great meeting again, gang. Bob Groden, you said at the beginning of the meeting you felt outnumbered, and it's unfortunate you feel that way, because I think your perspective in this committee was absolutely critical for this committee to consider and to make the best decision ultimately. The only difference between traditional business and the fire department is that for instance, the data that we see that 60% of the calls are medical. That data is generated after all of the calls are over. We don't know what necessarily the extent of the call is when the call goes into 911. So we would be derelict in not sending enough equipment and personnel to handle an emergency. So in many ways, that 60% of medical is kind of not a red flag, but a false flag, in terms of we need to send enough people and equipment, no matter what the emergency is, to handle whatever the emergency is. And that can kind of change that perspective. But your questions and your perspective on this issue has been critical for this committee. So well done all, and thank you, Bob, for having the courage to speak up and ask those questions. Cheers, Kane.
Rob, before you go, this is Mark Perry. Last week you asked me a question to ponder relative to the $1.5 million intercompany loan. And I did have time to think about this. And it boils down to other capital projects that I worked on when I was in the private sector. Is a business unit asked for capital to build something, improve something, or whatever. And they asked our board of directors for a loan. And the controller promptly said, absolutely not. And the reason being is because we're taking money out of one pocket and we're putting it in the other pocket. All of the money comes from the coffers of the corporation. Now, let me take that thought and bring it back to your question of the 1.5. What it seemed it was unfair for the taxpayers to have to pay the $1.5 million back. And this is what it came, and keeping in mind, taking out of one pocket and putting it in the other, is the township executed a construction agreement in its name to build or renovate Z for 1.5. Understand that it had to be done. But then it was, the question is well, how are we going to pay for it? And the pay for it is this, is you took 1.5 out of the general fund reserve and paid the contract in a form of an intercompany loan
Capital fund.
to the capital fund. The fire department's is a restricted millage rate funded department. The general fund is funded by the unrestricted general law township 1 mil. And so over the years, through prudent business management, the township had accumulated 4, 5, 6, 7 million in reserve, 8 million that it borrowed from to pay off the construction agreement they paid for, they executed. And then for whatever, again, I wasn't part of the discussion, debates or whatever, but then it would come up with was, well, we'll pay the 1.5 back from a restricted fund to, restricted fund to an unrestricted fund. So it doesn't seem, it strikes me as on the surface, because I don't know the details, that's inappropriate. How can we take restricted funds and put it in an unrestricted replacement fund of the general fund? So that's my thought, Bob, Rob, and if, if ever anybody asked me for my opinion on it, I would say the only way to get rid of the $1.5 million debt so the taxpayers don't have to increase the restricted fund millage rate to pay off that 1.5, because the fire fund doesn't have the funds presumably to do it, is that, okay, well, again, taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other, I would think that that 1.5 should be extinguished, because if it's not, it becomes a tax increase again, a second time.
Exactly.
On the voters to pay off that loan, but in the form of a restricted fire millage rate.
Or restricted public safety. millage
Rob,
rate.
based on, all the things that I've heard, that's my reply to you.
So basically forgive the loan.
Yeah.
Because it's
Thank you.
Scio Township property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that answer, Mark. The one not correction, but one modification I would make is that it's not that it's unfair for the taxpayers to pay it back. It's unfair that it has put the fire department in debt. And that's the unfair aspect of it. And thank you for that answer. That was the information I was looking for. the Budget and Finance Committee is meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. I would be hugely appreciative if you would be there and share that perspective
Saw that coming.
with them. Because at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting, they had an explanation of how we got to where we have put the fire department in debt. And there was absolutely no solution offered in that meeting. And in my opinion, again, I can't believe I'm saying this at yet another meeting, that one of the critical aspects of this committee is to resolve that debt that the township unfairly put the fire department into. But thank you for the answer. Really
Well, and I would say the place where I hope we will resolve this is at budget time, by budget time, for the fire department. You think that's ambitious?
I don't know, I'm just considering I've got a 145 budget.
Yeah, oh, that's funny. Yeah, but I will say, at the time that the board made the decision in November 2020, David and I were on the board. It was the recommendation of our finance staff to not bond, instead take it from the general fund as a loan. There's an elementary written motion that we made up to make a loan of 1.5 to the fire fund, which was the only fire fund that existed. We didn't have a fire capital fund because we weren't starting a project yet. And 1.5 to be paid back $75,000 a year. It was recommended. The chief was, worked with the then finance director, could afford it. Never, and shame on us, never did the chief, never did I, never did Donna, never did Jack, David, Kathy, Erwin, Chris. No, understand, was there a peep about the impact on fund balance? And initially it was in the capital fund for 1.5 years. And why this all cropped up was it was just this last spring where a staff person raised it and said, actually, we should move that from the capital fund where it's not cramping the style of the fire department back over to the fire department. So it was really honestly a policy decision that should be made by the board and not, in some journal entries made 6 months after the end of the fiscal year that are disputed.
Yeah,
It's a policy matter.
just going back to the crux of my thinking on this is that the taxpayers paid it once going into the unrestricted general fund. And if we're asked for them to pay it a second time,
Exactly.
to replenish the general fund reserve, it's a tax increase.
That's exactly.
It's a tax increase, and that's where I'm coming from, Rob.
That's where I'm coming from too, and that's why I've been so reactive about the public safety millage, because that is what I think it might be, particularly if it were, say, thrown on a May ballot for a summer tax.
So, spirit of complete disclosure here, I've been a taxpayer advocate, and represented them in court, in the tribunal for over 40 years. So that's the thinking behind me. That's
I'm
my
right with you.
motivation. One other thing, Rob, that I did was in option 1.5, you'll notice in the work papers that I took the line item of debt repayment of the 1.5 and zeroed it out. So the 2.6 mils assumes no payment of debt. And I couldn't find in the line item, Andy, the intercompany transfer between, for the 70,000 or whatever that number is. I didn't know where to zero that out to show the true financial impact. Could the 2.6 be lower? I don't know, because the only thing I took out is 1.5. I didn't take the debt service out.
Gotcha. Yeah, I did not include that in any of my numbers. That's one of my.
So I just wanted to express my opinion since I was asked, where do I stand on this?
Thank you, Mark. Rob, you done? I think he's done.
All set, thoroughly satisfied. Thank you very much, Al.
Anyone else?
No one else except I would just like to make a comment or a reminder that we've created a page for this committee on the website. And all the documents are shared there, and the Zoom link is hot linked on that page. So you can always rely on information there if you have any issues or if you want to access the documents directly.
Thank you.
And the documents from today's meeting, the contract and your spreadsheets are live, so.
And that's linked to by the Fire Services Committee.
Yeah, it's under both the fire department and also township committees. You can get to it either.
Thanks for all your work on that,
Yes,
Terry.
thank you, Terry. Yes, thank you. All right, no other hands raised? Okay, well, without objection, adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.